So I'm just psyched to translate. So all you guys speak English? I heard all you guys speak English. I'm like so psyched. If you were here for Dr. Makis, then I'm like so psyched that you're staying for me because he's like a hero of mine. So I'm happy to be here. My name is, I'm not sure what they said in the bio, but my name is Jeff Howe, and I'm a journalist and journalism professor, and I coined the term crowdsourcing. And I generally start with a video, which I can't see are they bright enough? Can you see the video?
For the entirety of human history, the crowd was dependent on proximity. We had to be together physically in order to create a crowd. Suddenly, with the internet, we were able to create a virtual crowd. And what this allowed is it allowed people to get together through intent, through shared interest. This is new. This is a fundamentally new development in the course of human history, that communities are able to form simply out of shared interest, a shared passion for a hobby, a craft, an art. So crowdsourcing is when a company takes a job that was once performed by employees and outsources it in the form of an open call to a large, undefined group of people, generally using the internet. There's a couple crucial terms in there. One is open call and the other is undefined, and they both get the same idea that the person who you think would be best qualified to perform a job isn't always the best person to do it. And the cocktail party version is very simple. It's crowdsourcing is Wikipedia with everything. Photography is a great example because it's what I think of as the canary in the coal mine. What's happened over recent years in photography is the advent of three separate developments. The first is the digital camera, the cheap, affordable SLR digital camera. The second is photo editing software, which has become easier and easier to use. And the third, of course, is the internet. And so the quality level of stock photos produced by amateurs essentially reached an equilibrium with those created by professionals. What happened was that stock photos were no longer a scarce commodity. They became an abundant commodity. Instead of charging $300 per stock photo, they charged $1. And as you can imagine, the demand for a commodity that had been marked down by 99% was huge. I don't think crowdsourcing eradicates a business, it just changes it dramatically. It forces companies to approach us as potential partners, and that's much more interesting and much more exciting. We do buy things, but we also participate meaningfully in the process by which those products are created. What we see with these successful forms of crowdsourcing is that they came up organically from the people formerly known as customers, from the people formerly known as the audience. The technology is so good that it's become easier for people to become very good. And then finally, the emergence of online communities. I like to think about the online community as kind of the building block of crowdsourcing. It's what the corporation is to the industrial era. It showed that people could come together and self-organize into productive units. What once took managers in a corporate hierarchy can now be done in the context of the community.
So believe it or not, there actually is a presentation. I don't just sit here while a video plays. But it's like having a dictionary definition for like 2 minutes first. And that way, because some of you probably know what crowdsourcing is, and some of you probably don't. And that way, but everyone at least then does. I like to talk about how the word came into being because it says a lot about the word and how it's become used. I've worked for Wired Magazine, which is a technology magazine in the United States since 2000. And really my gig in the beginning was writing about the music industry. I wrote about music, but then I really became fascinated with the business of music, especially after the internet and file sharing, and suddenly everyone's getting their music for free, this disturbed the music industry for some reason, that they could no longer sell their product, and thus had to lay off scads of people, and otherwise there was a hue and cry. And in 2005, I was doing an article about MySpace. Did MySpace get to Russia? Like, I feel like some of our social networking stuff comes and others don't. But believe it or not, in 2005, MySpace wasn't even Chris and Tom, the two guys who started MySpace, who in 2005 were just like these two dudes, not yet, rich as Cassius. They didn't know it was no one was even using the word social network. The idea was it was a site where musicians and models and artists and comedians especially could use this to circumvent the managers and the labels and the people who are otherwise basically in the business of kind of like doing stuff for them, but then taking a lot of money out of their pockets in exchange. And so I spent the summer on this like punk rock tour, going from city to city, hanging out with kids who were really young, which I kind of loved because even though I was like the oldster, even 8 years ago, I was, older than them. They were all like 18, 19 years old. I'm like an aging punk rock kid, so I had a really bad punk band when I was their age. So it truly was like, I mean, all punk is sort of suspect, but, and so they were like my kids, they were my people. But what I noticed, because I spent all this time and I hung out with them, and reporting on kids is fun because they don't bullshit you. They just, they say it like it is that the bassist in one band would do like the video for another band, and they all knew how to like make flash animations and design websites. And I'd walked up to this kid and I'd noticed that he was filming one of the performances, and I was like, oh, you want to be a filmmaker? Which is like this very adult thing to ask of a kid that's holding a camera. And he looked at me like I totally misunderstood like noun and verb. Like, no, he didn't want to be a filmmaker. He was filming. Like it was like asking someone holding a pencil if they wanted to be a pencil writer when they grew up. It was just a tool. He just happened to have this tool in his hand. And I feel like I felt like the ground shift beneath me. I was like, oh my God, like everything's going to totally change. Like at the time, almost 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about user-generated content, but it was treated really dismissively. Like, it's going to be about cat videos, and there was this, amongst all the adults in the room, especially, where I live, New York City, which is, like everyone's in the media business, it was treated like kind of this funny thing that we could safely ignore. But I realized, like, it's not, if all the tools get cheap as hell, and everyone can suddenly afford the tools, and you can learn how to use the tools on the internet, and then there's other people on the internet who will teach you how to use the tools for free, then everything changes. The professionals are all out of a job, and the amateurs all get to do it for free, and then all hell breaks loose, basically. And so the article went to press, and none of this was in the article. But 6 months later, I was giving a talk, and I wound up doing it on this subject, and I called my editor, and I was like, I think there's something here. And he agreed, but we were kidding. We call it crowdsourcing, because, I don't know, maybe they do this in Russia now too, but like you smush two different words together, and then you don't capitalize them, and like it becomes hip and trendy. And it's this very California thing. But I'm a New Yorker. I was on the East Coast. And he was like, no, that's good. We'll use it. Like this will help sell your article this way. And I was like, no, like it cheapens my genius idea. It felt like a gimmick. But then it's really hard to get 8 pages of real estate in Wired magazine, because it's every page is worth like $100,000. And so he took it into the pitch meeting, and they weren't sure about the idea, but they liked the word. And so I owe my editor a really nice suit, which I bought him actually. So he's the official co-creator of the word crowdsourcing. I need a clicker. So this was the metaphor that I used that kind of gave shape to how I was thinking about this before the article came out. It's that with user-generated content, I mean, YouTube, MySpace, it was out by then. It was like everyone standing around, a geyser. I don't know how that translates, but, you guys have like hot springs and stuff like that, right? And, we have it in Yellowstone, and everyone stands around, and every 32 minutes on the nose, this thing goes up, 400 feet, and people come from all over to stare at it. And I just had this vision of they were totally missing the point. They were seeing the symptom, but not the cause, because what was actually going on was that shit down below. It wasn't about, what was on the surface. It was about the thing that was going to make these 100 other geysers come up. And I mean, what's amazing is when I first gave this talk, this seemed kind of unbelievable. Like that, okay, yeah, sure, this is happening in content, but how will it ever happen in architecture? How will it ever happen in government? How will it ever happen in financial services or law? And now all those geysers are blowing up. And, I get calls from bankers who want to know, how am I going to save their job? And the answer is, I'm not sure I want to. The article came out June 2006, and you never know what's going to be a hit or a miss as a journalist, but this one was a hit. So that was a screen grab taken right before crowdsourcing, right before the article hit, and those are all people who those three hits are people who worked at Wired or slept with people who worked at Wired. And then this was 2 weeks later. So it just kind of exploded. And then some years passed, and then this is one of my favorite possessions. Is in 2011, I was asked to come because Karaman Gref, the chief of Sberbank, and I doubt Vladimir Putin, but who knows, maybe the president himself, but someone in the federal government had decided that they would have a crowdsourcing effort, and I had kind of heard that the president would be there, and I didn't know I'd be sitting next to him, and so that is daunting thing, maybe for you guys too, but as Americans, we're a little scared of Mr. Putin. So it was exciting is what it was. It was. I was very honored, and I was excited, and I was really anxious to find out what happened then. But because I don't read, I kind of know Cyrillic, but that's different than being able to read in Russian. I wanted to know what happened next, and I didn't get to find out until today, basically. So it's been exciting to be able to come here. The theme today has been cities, and so I've been thinking about this a lot this month, preparing for this, and this idea that citizens vote, but crowds act. And that the way a constituent or a citizen interacts with a governing body changes dramatically in an age of crowdsourcing. Because what you do, what you can offer the government and what the government offers you changes a lot when your interaction is no longer limited to this one time a year or one time every 4 years that you actually walk into your voting precinct and push a button. As I've learned today, I think Moscow was actually ahead of most cities. Everything but Singapore is what I've heard. Certainly ahead of Boston, where I live. And Boston is a very tech-friendly city in actually making use of this. But what we know so far, because crowdsourcing itself is still very, very young, is that some stuff works and a lot of stuff doesn't. When the word was first coined, and then a couple years later, I came out with, I wrote a book about it. So I spent years really studying this. And in the beginning, it was, so here was this thing that was going to be a big threat. It was going to put a lot of people out of work. And it has. That stock photography example, I don't know if photography, that market works the same in Russia as it does in the US, but it used to be that's how photographers made their living, was the stuff that someone would commission them, they would take 80 shots, and the client would use one, and the other 79 they would put on a marketplace, and they would make, every time it would be like $300, and they would get half of that, the agency would get the rest. It was gone. Like, just like that. I mean, someone had undercut them by 99%. The threat part was there, and then you also have this promise part. Suddenly, you could be a disabled kid in Louisiana who really loved photography, and 10 years before, you would have just remained a disabled kid in Louisiana who really loved photography. But enter crowdsourcing, and this kid suddenly is able to practice his art. I mean, this is a person, actually, on iStock. And while they remain in this small town, suddenly there's a market for them. There's a community that loves this guy's photographs. And so you have all this promise. I think we really latched on to the promise of crowdsourcing. And so we collectively, like everyone, like humans, did really dumb things that just didn't work. And we were very naive about not so much like what the crowd could do, but like what they wanted to do. I remember like shortly after the article came out, I teamed up with New York University. It was this NYU Wired project, and we were going to crowdsourcing. The idea was that, people would come from all over and they would write articles about how crowdsourcing was affecting architecture and all these other domains. But it took us like 3 months to realize that people actually hate writing. Like, they're actually, what professional writers can tell you, which is that writing sucks. Like, everyone else actually knows that already. So no one wants to write that. So what we've learned over time is that you have to really gauge what you're asking of the crowd, and also what you're offering them. Another idea that we sort of have put to rest is that people just want to do stuff because they're like, cool. Like, you have to actually be giving them something. Like, there has to be something of value, even if it's not money. And it's actually usually not money. And in fact, sometimes money is the thing you don't want to give them, because then it just becomes this commercial transaction. And interestingly, people aren't always motivated by that. So here's the way of crowdsourcing in government that works really, really great. Is that the crowd, just by fact of existing and having eyes and fingers to type with, can do more in 30 seconds than citizens, could have done, with a lifetime of effort just a few short years before. One of my favorite examples, and Moscow has something very similar, is in fact, one question I have for you is how many of you use it, but is SeeClickFix, which was, I just love how it was started. It was a programmer, 28-year-old guy living in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is, and a lot of New Haven people think Yale, but a lot of New Haven is the pits. It's not a nice city, not all of it. And there was graffiti on his neighbor's house, and he kept calling and asking the city to come and remove this graffiti, and they didn't, and he was like, I wish there was a way that everyone else in New Haven knew that I was making these calls, and the government was just ignoring me. Like, he's pissed. Like, no one's calling him back, no one's removing the graffiti. So he's like, actually, this being 2008, there's a really simple solution for that, which is you just create a website and you put on the fact that the city is not responding to you. But because he was a programmer, he went further and made some really key decisions, which made it successful. One, and this goes back to what I was saying of like, what are you asking the crowd to do, is he made it really, really simple. You write a short email, you say there's a pothole on my street, you hit send, and then the site automatically routes it to where it needs to go. You don't need to go onto the city website and try and make a call to figure out which agency it goes to, which is very much how it still actually happens in most cities in America. And the other thing that was important is that this was, everyone else could go on the website and they would see immediately, oh, look, someone else has called about that pothole. I'll add my name to the list. And then suddenly the city has an idea like, hey, 20 people have complained about this pothole. Only one has complained about the other one. We know how to adjust our priorities. So SeeClickFix becomes this huge success. It's now in 175 cities. There have been some nearly 700,000 projects have been resolved, and nearly I think 400,000 people registered for it. I want to look at, this is my favorite example of data collection. And it's birding. Do people bird in Russia? Do people go out and like watch birds? Really? Yeah? All right. It seems kind of weird. I don't. Birds don't particularly excite me, and everything. I'm a journalist. I'm curious about everything, but not birds. But it is the most popular recreation in America. The single most popular. It's like Super Bowl and birds. But a thing happens when you have, again, millions of eyeballs and fingers that type out running around the country looking at birds. And this has been happening for decades and decades. It's an enormous amount of data is being collected. And until we had a network to connect that data, and until, it wasn't just the network, until we had brains that could actually think why don't we use that network to get that data? There was no way of connecting it. So I always think of it as like black matter in outer space. Like we know that there's this enormous amount of knowledge, but we're not tapping it. That's still the case. That's still like crowdsourcing, all this stuff is like in its very bitter, little tiny infancy. But in ornithology, which is the study of birds or birding, we can at least kind of see like where it's headed, like what it could be, what the ideal is. And the ideal is this. In 2005, what is pictured there, the cute little guy, is the great Cozumel thresher. And Cozumel is an island off the Caribbean coast of Mexico. And like a lot of islands in the Caribbean, it gets slammed by hurricanes every 10 or 15 years. And in 2002, it got slammed by one of these that just leveled Cozumel. I mean, there's like virtually nothing left on the island. And all the professional ornithologists assume that it's basically been a big extinction event on this island. Well, the next year, these birders, these amateurs, get together and schedule a trip down to the Caribbean to, A, be in a nice place. It's not bad to be in the Caribbean. And B, go do the thing they love, which is watch birds. And they cite a Cozumel thresher. And it's a fairly well-known bird. So this is a big deal. And they write this up. And everyone, all these millions of people who are birders learn that this bird is in fact not extinct, that it's still alive. And 2 years later, all these professional ornithologists go down to the same island, and they also see the thresher. And they come back, and they publish this in a peer-reviewed journal, they've just been to the moon, and everyone's going to, stand up and applaud this scientific discovery. And someone has to tell them, the amateurs figured this out 3 years ago. And they realize, there has to be, this is sort of like the moment they decide, there has to be a way to connect all this information with the professionals. And so they create eBird. And eBird was started by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It was kind of a leading academic institution. And it was, the idea was we will let the small people, the amateurs amateurs their data to us. And some birders did. Some birders are total, crack addicts about birding. And so they indeed uploaded their how many birds did you see? What were the GPS coordinates? What time of day? What time of month was it? It was okay. It was May 2008, and they received 115,000 data points basically. But they thought, we could probably do this better. And Facebook had come out by that time. And so the guy who was running the eBird project said, why don't we make it so that instead of us letting people give us their data, we make it like a Trojan horse. We make something so awesome that if you're a birder, you have to be on eBird. And so they made a site that is it was like a big gift to anyone who actually liked to go birding. It was a place where you could connect with other birders. You could, put all your data and it would store it. Birders like making lists, so it would organize all your lists for you. It's was a smartphone app before smartphones were out. It was a service offered to people. In exchange, by the next May, they had 1.15 million data points. So they had expanded by a degree of magnitude the data they were collecting. So we're now at a point where ornithology is officially, it's a hybrid science. It's the first discipline we have that is powered not just by academics, but equally by amateurs. If you're an ornithologist now, you don't bother doing field work, like going out and actually looking at birds. I was told the ornithologists I interviewed said, we can't begin to compete. The amateurs are way better than us, and they outnumber us like 1,000 to 1. There's one of me. All these other well-trained eyeballs out there collecting this data for us. This example of the sorts of maps. eBird. One of my other favorite examples, which even boils down, what you're asking from the crowd to really nothing. Strava Metro is, you can read the text, but essentially it's a way to provide cities with data about where do people jog, how often do they go, where do they bike, where should we build our next bike path. This information that's otherwise hard to obtain. I mean, you could imagine a city would think, oh, well, how should we go about this? Okay, well, we'll put up a site and we'll ask citizens to come and tell us. Where do they like to jog? Where should we build? And they would be seen. That would be crowdsourcing. That would be seen as enlightened and progressive. Strava had a better idea. Again, this idea of like, I don't know if there's JFK quote is famous in America. It's ask not what the community can do for you. Ask not what you can do for it, but ask what you can do for the community. I'm changing it a little bit. But the idea is rather than just ask for something, what can you give them? The same thing with eBird. So what Strava did is it just made a killer app that athletes can connect with athletes. It keeps track of how many miles did you jog, what your heart rate was. It organizes all this data that people would want. And then it's free, but it's not free because you're giving them the data. It's been anonymized, but then they're able to send that to the city. So instead of the city having self-reported data, unreliable data, stuff that, maybe 1 out of 1,000 joggers, they have this. A really robust map of exactly what the joggers, the bicyclists, the commuters, the pedestrians are doing in that city and what the actual usage pattern is. Which, says something sort of profound about and actually a little creepy. I mean, there's sort of a privacy issue there that you have so much data being collected, and as we get better and better organizing, that this too is a form of crowdsourcing. A form of crowdsourcing that people aren't even actively participating in. It's like passive crowdsourcing. How many? 5? 5 for the whole thing or Q&A? Q&A. All right. So the problem-solving form of crowdsourcing is harder. I'm just going to spend like a minute on this because I want to do Q&A. Because it's asking for a lot more. It's like what we did in journalism with NYU, where we were asking people to actually write an entire article, to go out and become a journalist for the sheer simple pleasure of being a journalist, which we actually think is pleasurable, but most people don't, as we discovered. And it's been a lot harder. So a project that started last year, Changed by Us, NYC, very well-meaning. The idea was the crowd would come together. They would identify problems in New York City. They would form teams. They would find people they would sort of self-organize into teams of problem solvers that could figure out how to solve this problem. And then they would, put forth policies that the city government could then enact. And this is an enormous amount of labor for people who are busy and just want to see their kids for like half an hour before they have to go to bed. Sort of unsurprisingly, Changed by Us did not take off. It did not work really well. What we do know, and I'm not going to go into it because I actually want to do Q&A, is that it does work in other domains. This is one of my favorite quotes. Bill Joy co-founded Sun Microsystems, and it's at the root of this it's at the root of all crowdsourcing, but it's really at the root of this complex form of crowdsourcing, which is that, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. So if you're at Harvard, most of the smartest people work somewhere else. If you're not in touch with them, then most of the knowledge that's going on, most of the good ideas are not where you are. So that idea drives another one of my favorite examples, one of these little examples that know that when we actually do get it right, it's magic. It is magic. InnoCentive was started by Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company, and the idea is they would run into a problem that they could not solve. You're talking about 7,000 PhDs, chemists and physicists and electrical engineers that cannot solve a problem. So these are hard problems. What they decided is like, but maybe like someone in Russia knows, like, we don't know what they know. They've been trained at different schools. They might know stuff. And in fact, it's most of the people in this network. It's now about 400,000 scientists all around the world. Doesn't matter if you have a PhD or not. About 2/3 do. Yuri Yuri Bodrov is, as of 2010, was the #1 solver. And he did all of this not at an institution, not at a lab, but simply by his own knowledge. There's Yuri. Sorry, Yuri. So Kareem Lakhani at Harvard Business School studied why does InnoCentive work? It works about 1/3 of the time, which is a lot considering that these are problems I can't even understand when I read them. And the thing that amazes me, that says everything you want to know, if this is the only thing you walk out of here remembering, the thing that blows me away is this is just fancy talk for positive correlation between success and distance from field, is that the less someone knew about the discipline that the problem was in, the better chance they had of solving it. So the chemists had already tried to solve the problem. I mean, this isn't true of all problems. Like 9 times out of 10, the chemists are like, yeah, they solved the chemistry problem. But what about the one time they don't? What do? We throw more chemists at it. If you take 15 of the best chemists in America, you have succeeded in creating one chemist. Because they all went to the same schools, they all know the same people, and they all think the same way, because they're chemists. What InnoCentive proves is that what crowdsourcing does is it's a completely new way of allocating intellectual resources. So Yuri Bodrov is I think a physicist. None of the solutions he solved, like one, is in physics. What he does is he takes what he knows about physics and he applies it to these other areas. I'm not sure I've quite seen this work in terms of government and city. I think it's a harder nut to crack. The other guy went on long. I do want to get to Q&A. So let's, here it is all over again. I'll keep that up there. That was my last slide anyway. Yeah, hi, in the front. Yeah, great, thanks.
Hello. Да? Ну, все-таки можно по-английски. Thank you very much for your narration, Jeff. And tell us, please, how do you think, how many still will live crowdsourcing?
How many will what?
Live.
How many?
Yeah,
you should just ask me in Russian, because I got the magic earbud
Сколько
thing.
он протянет, сколько он...
Yeah, how long is there for crowdsourcing to survive? For how long would it last?
Как вы думаете, сколько проживет crowdsourcing?
So how do you think, how many years to live for crowdsourcing left?
Before we stop calling it crowdsourcing, I don't know. I mean, the term is a fad. I mean, I'm sick of it. I kind of am. I mean, it's not the best one. I like open innovation, but the phenomenon, I don't know. I mean, I'm biased, right? Like you have this saying, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everything looks like something that's about to be crowdsourced to me. But what you're talking about is the network in effect. I think of crowdsourcing as the first native operating system for the information age. Like everything else is what, we programmers would call a kludge. Like, it's like, oh yeah, well, we've got this network, people can work from home. Like, that's not taking advantage of the network. That's what a 20th century mind does when it's confronted with a new idea. And this is like a caveman, looking at fire and being like, well, I guess we can warm ourselves with it. 1,000 years later, someone will be like, oh my God, we could cook meat. It would taste so much better. Like, film is invented in 1895. It takes 5 years before someone actually does a close-up. You know what they had to do? Take a camera and walk like this and put it back down.
It took thousands of films in 5 years for someone to realize that one could do that. You know what they're afraid of? That if you did a close-up, people would see like only part of a body and think that the rest had been cut off and didn't exist. Like that is what smart, intelligent people worried about with the close-up. So, you know, it takes time to figure stuff out. Crowdsourcing, the phenomenon of actually like having people from all over the world collaborate on something, I don't know, 1,000 years? 10? I mean, who knows? I don't know. It's not going away anytime soon. It'll get bigger before it gets smaller.
Hello, Jeff. I got a question. Sociology teaches us that the crowd has the lower interest in high culture, exclusive culture. Is it possible to downgrade the whole cultural level with promoting such ideas as simple as some photographs made by disabled kid from somewhere, and demoting some high-quality cultural artifacts? Is it possible to demote?
What do you mean by?
Is it possible to demote some high-class culture while promoting with interest of a crowd some primitive, maybe amateur culture?
I think I kind of get what you're saying. I mean, are you saying like crowdsourcing sort of like works against high culture? Like people, because of crowdsourcing, people don't read like, you know, enough Tolstoy and Yeats?
Say you compare a YouTube video, just amateur film.
Yeah.
A boy made, a youngster made in his backyard, and you compare it with some piece of art like Count
Yeah,
film.
maybe if that kid grows up to be, you know, the next, you know, Sergei Eisenstein, yeah, totally. Like I call it a young Sergei Eisenstein.
Okay.
Who maybe doesn't happen to have to know the right people in order to be. How many Sergei Eisensteins do you think never got to be Sergei Eisenstein because they didn't know the right people, they didn't have enough money to afford a camera? I call it democracy. You know, suddenly like enough people can actually, you know, they have a network, they have cheaper equipment that they can bring their ideas out. I think, you know, I'm sorry, I'm from Ohio, I'm from a very middle class place. I was an art critic for 3 years, believe me, no one is as invested in the high culture as I am. But I take the elitism, this idea that you know, because there's a network, everyone wants to watch people, you know, men get kicked in the balls, like to just be bullshit. Like, I actually think that watching a man get kicked in the balls is really, really funny, and then I'll go watch a movie by Chris Marx, you know, which like 0.001% of the world thinks is entertaining, but I happen to like it.
Добрый вечер, good evening.
Good evening, Jeff. I would ask the question in Russian, if you don't mind. So the question is the following. Whenever you talk about crowdsourcing for better cities, and all the showcases that you showed us are from cities where internet technologies are very well developed, and they are generally very developed cities. I'm a representative of a developing country, and whenever I talk of crowdsourcing, I think of the level of penetration of internet, and in our case it is no more than 20%, and it applies only to the capital. As for the country in the general, it would be around 7 to 6%. Do you have any cases of crowdsourcing, successful crowdsourcing cases, based not solely on internet penetration and social networks? Is it possible to have it without internet?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So the first crowdsourcing example is in 1714, the British Parliament offered £10,000, I forget, but it's like $8 million, a lot of money, to anyone who could solve the longitude problem. So you know, this is a period of time when England spent like half of its GDP on ships.
And like half of those that were built every year would then, founder on the rock somewhere because all they knew was latitude. There was no, they had rough idea of longitude, but no precise way of knowing where they were in the ocean. You can imagine that being a scary thing if you're, out in an enormous vessel in the open sea. And it was publicized what existed, what passed for newspapers in 1714. Town criers went out, and I don't know is the plain truth. Word was promulgated. However, word got around in 1714, and it's actually what I love about it is true to what we see in crowdsourcing today. It was solved not by anyone in the Royal. I'm blanking, the Royal Academy, the scientists of their day. It was solved by a clockmaker, a relatively uneducated clockmaker named John Harrison, who figured out that if you made a really incredibly robust clock that would not lose even a second, even in a saltwater environment where there would be corrosion otherwise, that you could, in fact, it's a chronometer. Crowdsourcing doesn't need the internet, but the internet makes it a lot easier. Much more to your point, could you realistically have a crowdsourcing initiative in government in a city where 6-7% of the populace was online? I think it would be rough. But I didn't 20% is online at all, like even with smart, because poor parts of Africa are higher than that because of smartphones. Only 20% in Moscow have access to the internet. Oh, so what is it in Moscow? What, 80? Yeah. I would think. But the impression I get is, so how many of you have participated in, because Moscow has crowdsourcing, you're able to, this is the impression I have from being here today, is that city government in Moscow is at least as efficient as New York and possibly more. And New York is not exactly a high bar, but it's the one that I know. You can go online and pay parking tickets, right? You can schedule a passport appointment. That's right. Okay, I don't know. Are there other questions? Yeah? All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Мы благодарим Джеффа за столь интересное
We would like to thank Jeff for such an interesting presentation. And now I would like to announce
будет показан фильм.
that we will show you a movie which is called Capital C.
И я бы хотела пригласить
And I would like to invite
Алену Бочарова,
Alona
которая
Bocharova,
расскажет об этом фильме чуть
who will
больше.
tell you a little bit more about this movie.
Я убрал всю длину свою, мы поставили по центру тумбы на сцену, они перед сценой в кружок сели.
Раз. Здравствуйте, мы команда BitFilms. Будем буквально два слова.
I would just like to say a couple words because we're a Midfield team. We have been supervising the program of documentary movies within this forum. Together with the Strelka Institute, we invented this year that it will be not only the program of movies about the cities, it will be correlated somehow with the presentations organized by Strelka. Here, 1 hour ago, we had a presentation of Mr. Mokus here, and we really love him. And he is really famous. When he was the mayor of Bogota, he invented the concept of super civico, super citizen. This is a citizen which is really obeying its rights as a citizen. So the movie I'm going to show you today, which is called Letter C, who is talking about those citizens who are really quite initiative in starting different products and thinking how these services can really be helpful for people in society. And it is also more about those people who are supporting this initiative, and we also consider them to be super citizens. I will tell you a little bit about the film. This is called Capital C, and the crowdsourcing, crowdfunding also start with an C, because it is a reason to show this movie within this urban movies, because the connection between the crowdfunding and urbanistics is not so clear. But here you can see not only any probably state-of-the-art economic model which we can use to find financing for your different projects, but this movie shows you all key probably columns of crowdfunding in America. On a Kickstarter platform, it also shows you how you can use a crowdfunding in order to change the community around you and search for those who think in the same way with you, how you find an audience and how you can start a project, and from an idea up to implementation, which can be watched by thousands of people. It is actually the first time when we show this movie, this program, and every single evening we will show you a movie, and you can also get information out of the agenda, what kind of the titles of the movies, but they all link to the cities which normally mentioned during the presentations. Here we have 3 screens, so you can choose any screen you like to watch this movie, and we want you to enjoy the movie. Thank you very much. And before we start the movie, I would like to ask the spectators to return their headsets, because the film will be shown with subtitles.